Let's go to another story that's developing. Striking National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union members have vowed now more than ever to make their concerns heard. At a media briefing earlier today, the unions, of course, say they will intensify protests from tomorrow until the demands are met. And the union is accusing government of being arrogant during negotiations. And the union is demanding a 10% wage hike. But the government is offering 4.7%. Operations have been disrupted at various health facilities countrywide since the strike began last Monday. The Labour Appeal Court, meanwhile, will decide on Monday on the union's appeal against the interdict by government to try and stop the strike.
To our dismay, the negotiators of employer made the U-turn when we thought that we are registering progress by indicating that they are no longer interested in negotiating a settlement agreement to resolve the impasse. The employer arrogantly demanded that we must drop the dispute process and return to the council to engage on the 2023-2024 public service wage negotiations. Again, this is another demonstration of how far government is prepared to undermine and collapse collective bargaining and the dispute resolution mechanism by imposing their will on workers. We are aware that certain ministers inside the mandating committee of the employer have refused to support the new minister, to resolve the impasse. Instead, they engage in tactics to divide unions, and we want to warn them that this approach is regressive and will collapse public service. At the onset of the facilitation process, we were upfront in trying to resolve the dispute by tabling a proposed settlement agreement which entails, among others, cessation of hostilities, which was meant to see parties agreeing on resolving the strike and talking to relevant issues linked to hostilities. 2, defending the council and collective bargaining, which meant that the parties will agree on defending the SABC and as such, the unions that are currently not part of the 2023-2024 round of collective bargaining to return to the council and participate fully. 3, augmentation of the 2020 salary increase, which meant that the state having unilaterally implemented 3% salary increase for 2020-2023 financial year will augment at least 3% with a percentage to be agreed by parties. For minimum service level agreement, that parties agrees that the long outstanding issue of the minimum service level agreement be concluded in council within the period of 6 months. As NEHAWU, we want to register that it's becoming quite clear to us that despite all our efforts to resolve the dispute, the government is not interested in concluding the 2022-2023 dispute, as they argue that they have closed and concluded the negotiations in that financial year. This was despite the fact that there was no resolution for that financial year, but rather a unilateral implementation of the 3%, which was way below the CPI. With this arrogance displayed by government, it is important to confirm that NEHAWU continues with the strike in a more intensified manner as from tomorrow, Monday, the 13th March 2023, to demonstrate to government the seriousness with which we take the concerted efforts to underplay the role and the significance of public servants who are at the coalface of service delivery.
Let's stay with this particular story and explore this further with Patrick Makhafane, NEHAWU's second Deputy President, and Malema, NUPSAW's General Secretary. Thank you so much for your time to both of you. I'll start with you, Patrick. There's now talks of intensifying the protest action. What does intensifying look like on the ground? Mr. Makhafane, were you able to hear me, Patrick?
Yes, I'm able to hear you.
Yes, I was asking, what does intensifying the strike action mean at a ground level?
Well, intensifying means that you are continuing with your action because you have not gotten the attention that you needed from those that are relevant, and that because nothing has been coming forward, which is positive, you've got no choice but to continue and actually strengthen the power which you have been using in order to ensure that you bring more workers on the picket line.
So is it only just more workers and not some of the scenes that we've seen?
Well, we are not a violent organization, therefore we have addressed quite a number of things internally, but the strike will still continue in a manner in which it was intended for, because the legal action and it's the only recourse which the workers have, which is legal, to showcase to the public and the society that in actual fact these demands that they are putting forward has not been listened to for the past 2 years.
Now, Solly, thank you so much. I do understand that you've now joined us for this conversation. Would you say, you know, that from where you are standing, that the employer and yourselves may be able to find each other?
It is quite difficult at this current.
Sorry, Mr. Makhafane. That question was for Mr. Malema. I'll come back to you in just a moment.
Okay, all right.
Solly?
You asked, and my comrade is there. Can you hear me?
All right, Solly, I'm going to ask the team just to try and get you back on the line. Let me go back to Mr. Makhafane. Mr. Makhafane, let's talk about the negotiations, because some of your colleagues were talking about, you know, how these are not being done in good faith, and it looks like the employer is having a bit of a rigid hand. Do you think that there's a possibility, though, that you and the employer may find each other?
Look, my sister, I can only confirm the commitment which has always been there from the trade unions that are embarked in this particular dispute process. We, as the leadership of this affiliate, have always availed ourselves 24/7 to say we want to engage on this matter in order to avert, in fact, the industrial action. We have always been there on the ground, including to come to a stage where the strike would have started, including to make a call this past week that we are ready to go to the table. We requested the facilitation. The employer representation came there and actually did absolutely nothing to move from point A to the next point, which will signal that there's a positive attitude and a positive spirit within which they are coming back with. Instead, they came there and they just said, no, they've got no mandate whatsoever, and that you'll understand it's not making our work any easier. So from our side, we remain committed to take any call that says let's go back and let's seriously engage on the process. And that people must not come to the table and say they've got no mandate when we are handling a very serious situation in the country because of this particular impasse.
Solly, I do understand that you're back with us now, and I hope it's a better line. There are some that are saying that while the strike, of course, spreads across various sectors, it does appear to be targeted at the, you know, at the healthcare, you know, only, or even more intensely, other than what we've seen at Home Affairs, for example. How do you respond?
Well, this is a public service strike. It's not only about the health sector. And we are adamant that victory is certain. We're dealing here with the employer who is very arrogant, and the employer who is doing everything in his power to divide labor. For instance, we understand that going to the table or the strike is a continuation of the negotiations. Hence, we agreed to a facilitation process. But what the employer is trying to do, which is completely unacceptable, is trying to say, forget about 2022, 2023 wage negotiations, and let's start a new wage negotiations 2023, 2024. Which, in our view, is we need to first finalize the 2022-2023 wage negotiation. I think That is where we are.
So
we do not have a dispute in 2023-2024 negotiations at this point in Judge.
So how do you respond to some of the allegations that the 4 deaths that we saw were linked to this particular strike, and it has now led to some of those who are asking how many more must die before the strike comes to an end?
That is not true. Remember, when our view is that, and our position is that we can't just accelerate. We must first see how, if the employer is willing to engage in a meaningful discussion so that we lay this matter to rest. But unfortunately, we will have to accelerate. As NUPSAW, we have served the notice, and other unions that are rejecting the 3%. So we are now going to accelerate the strike. We don't have any choice, but the employer invited the strike. For
NUPSAW, what does acceleration mean? What does it look like?
The acceleration means all the departments will be affected. All public servants are now going to participate in the strike.
And let me come back to you, Ndate Makhafane, before we run out of time. Let's talk about tomorrow. Of course, there is now, the Labour Court that is meant to pronounce on that particular interdict. Do you think you'll successfully defend your case?
Our legal representation has done a very good job when the arguments were taking place at the Court of Laws. We are now only waiting for the judgment from the judge himself. Until we get such, we will then, of course, be guided again by our legal representation as to what should be the way forward, depending on how the outcome is. Where does it put ourselves? But safe to say, we are willing to forge ahead with our strike, and that's why we're saying tomorrow we're intensifying in order to respond to this arrogance of the employer. So insofar as the legal process are concerned, there is a legal team that is forever ready to receive the outcome, study the outcome, and advise the leadership of the organization as to how to proceed.
And in about 10 seconds, we're out of time, Mr. Makhafane. I'd like to ask you the same question I asked Ndate Malema. How do you respond to the fact that now the Department of Health saying that preliminary, it looks like the 4 deaths, that took place may be attributed to this particular strike?
It is mischievous of the Department of Health to lay such a huge allegation without having the real facts. Look, when any union, in terms of the law, goes to a strike, it issues out a notice. It is then up to the employer to do 2 things. To prepare for an eventuality of the strike itself so that the business of the employer is not entirely collapsed. It is the obligation of the employer because the workers are about to exercise their own rights. The second thing is, in the same notice, the employer must be seen to be sweating to resolve the impasse. And in the 2 counts that I've mentioned, the Department of Health, which is under the DPSA, under our state as the government, as an employer of the public servant, they have dismally failed to do so. Instead, they had all the energy and time to run to court and waste time, and nobody was paying attention to how to resolve the impasse before you even get the second or even a week in order to avoid this particular unfortunate situation. Now, you are using the unfortunate incidents of the people who have passed on to play a blame game when already you have failed dismally to run your particular business. I must state this before we cut off, that in the private sector, in terms of the Labour Relations Act, the unions are giving the employer 48 hours to go on strike. In the public service, the union, by law, it gives the public sector as an employer 7 days to prepare for any eventuality. In the 7 days, just like they've failed in the 2 years, they have done absolutely nothing except to prepare for the court argument. We do think that that's an abuse of democracy.
All right, let me thank you both for your time and see what then the week holds, and we'll continue to monitor developments around this as the unions are vowing to intensify their strike action. That was Patrick Makhafane, NEHAWU's second deputy president, and Malema, NUPSAW's general secretary.